We talk about the LA Kings home ice winning streak and more with Austin Stanovich on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the last 18 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. We are happy to welcome back to the show Austin Stanovich. He is now covering the LA Kings for the Sporting Tribune, and you can follow him on X and Twitter at Stanovich68. That's Stanovich 68. Hey, Austin, good to have you back on the show again. How are you?
I'm doing good, Eddie. It's always a blast going back on here. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you. Definitely have a lot of things to talk about regarding the LA Kings. We haven't had you on since the start of the season, so I'm really curious to get your take on what we've seen so far this year. But let's start with the latest news involving the LA Kings and getting some league-wide attention, probably because of where he went as well. But on Monday, the Kings lost Arthur Kaliev. He was put on waivers Sunday, claimed by the New York Rangers on Monday. What's your take on how Arthur Kaliev's time in LA is now concluded? I guess there's always a chance he could do a Samuel Fagemo and come back. You never know, but likely not. But your thoughts on Arthur Kaliev?
Yeah, I think it was tracking this way for a while now. I know after the game in Vancouver last year when they opted to go 11-7 and scratch him the first time, he had requested a trade then. And from there, I just don't think that relationship ever recovered. He couldn't get back in the lineup. I mean, I do think it was tracking this way for a while. They apparently couldn't get any buyers at the draft. No one wanted to pay whatever it was Rob Blake wanted. I kind of got the sense that their hope was get him back in the preseason. You know, maybe he scores a couple goals, he looks good, and then get his value up to where someone bites at that price. And then once that injury happens and misses a couple months, I think that just killed that possibility. And I don't know the inner workings of it. I do have to wonder if this is a situation too where Arthur Kaliev obviously wanted out. The Kings didn't really have a ton of interest in using him, and instead of trying to hold out for a trade, they just almost for the benefit of Arthur were like, "Hey, we're just going to waive you, let you get somewhere else." Like they'd be pinching for at best maybe a 5th round pick, but probably a 6th or 7th round pick, like a 3% chance of picking an NHL guy. So I also have to wonder if there's an element of just, let's end this situation. Let's stop kind of dangling Arthur around. Don't make him sit up in the press box for any longer. Let's just get him playing hockey somewhere, even if it isn't us.
Yeah, it is kind of surprising that they couldn't get something for him, right? I mean, so many teams love that whole change of scenery. If we just get him in the right spot, we can turn this thing around. And maybe it'll happen for Artie in New York. Who knows? But it is kind of surprising. I guess if you're looking at kind of what is surprising in all of this, I think it's also surprising he lasted to New York and like Buffalo or somebody didn't want to take a shot at him. But it is kind of surprising the Kings couldn't get something for him, I thought.
Yeah, I think he is kind of in a weird spot as a player too, where he is still young, but he's 23. It's not like he's 19. There's still some runway, but not a ton. And I think a lot of teams at the very bottom, like the Buffaloes, Anaheims, Chicago, they have younger prospects who they're going to want to play in the spots that Artie potentially would take anyway. So instead of picking up 23-year-old Arthur Kaliev who has warts in his game, they would rather just try and develop one of the many draft picks they have. And if you're not going to put, and we saw this in LA, if you're not going to get Arthur into a top 6, maybe top 9 spot, depending on your third line, he's not going to fit on your fourth line. He's not a physical player. He's not a guy that's going to forecheck really hard. So he had a really narrow kind of scope of what he could get into. There was, I think, a smaller section of teams that were going to be interested in than some fans think, just because, again, a lot of teams either have prospects they'd rather play over him, or they're not going to want him for a fourth line role. So he needed a team that had a top 9 opening that didn't already have a plethora of prospects they wanted to put in the spot.
So I mentioned we haven't had you on since the beginning of the season. LA Kings, 51 points in 38 games, sixth most points in the NHL, and they've played fewer games than all the teams that are in front of them going into Tuesday's action, riding a 9-game home winning streak. Where do you feel the Kings kind of fit in amongst the best teams in the NHL right now?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not quite there with putting them in that upper echelon. I'm not there elevating them up to like a cup contender. And I also, if you are a Kings fan and you're listening to this and you say, screw that, this team is a contender, they look great, they look different this year, totally cool. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I'm not going to tell you to stop thinking that way. Like, this team has been playing fantastic. I'm not trying to take away from how well they've played and the fact that I do think this team does look a little bit different and in theory should be better in the playoffs, but they're still certainly in a wait and see, I need to see in the playoffs kind of thing before I change what my evaluation was in a big way on this team. Like, I still think they're in that second tier of teams behind the Oilers, the Stars, probably even Vegas, how well they're playing. Like, those teams in the West, I still think they're in that tier below until they prove otherwise deep into the season, the playoffs, right? Like, Jim Hiller was asked after the game on Saturday if he thinks this team could be a contender, and his thing was kind of like, well, I hope so, but we've got a long, long way to go until then. And that's where I'm at. Like, we are so far away from, I think, being able to really talk about them as that upper echelon team. And, there's, I don't want to say warning signs, but like, there's still question marks about this team. Darcy Kemper's been fantastic, but last year Cam Talbot was quite literally an all-star, and then the second half didn't look as good, and he ends up getting pulled in the playoffs. How long can Andre Kopitar keep putting up, potentially unsustainable numbers? He's amazing, don't get me wrong, but this guy's 37, about to put up the best season of his career, on pace to do so. Can he keep that up? We've already seen Alex Laferriere's production start to dip. Can someone pick up where he left off on? Kevin Fiala is not having a great season. Like, there are still question marks here that make me not confident in saying, yeah, this team's taking that next step. They're a legitimate cup contender. I still really want to wait and see if this team ends up winning, see how the end of the season looks. They're really winning games, game 75, 76, 77. They've done this a few years in a row now where they've looked really good to start, hit a hiccup, and then really, as the games get more intense, as they get into kind of the tough parts of the year, haven't looked quite as good. They've stuttered, and then obviously we know what happens in the playoffs. So I'm still waiting for those really tough games. I mean, they had already started it, but around this time last year, the Kings looked really good, and then a month later, they're firing their coach. So it can just turn so quickly. I think we're too early on to really change personally. I think it's too early for me to change my preseason evaluation on this team.
Well, Jim Hiller said going into the season, he wanted the Kings to maintain their identity, being a good, solid defensive team while also trying to add more offense. Well, the Kings are tied with Dallas going into Tuesday's action for the fewest goals allowed, and also tied with Dallas for the fewest goals allowed per game in the NHL. So the defense is obviously still there. How do you feel about what he's done? And we'll talk about the power play later, but how do you feel about what he's done to try and get more offensively? Has it been there for you, or still to wait to see?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason we've seen so much 11-7 is to try and really get that offense going. I think that he really likes the ability to, not that you don't have the ability to really run your top guys a lot more with the 12-6 lineup, but it does make it a little bit easier to, let's say Quinton Byfield's having a really nice game, to get him a couple extra shifts. Adrian Kempe can get a couple extra shifts. So I think that's one thing he's done. You definitely do notice a little bit more room for those guys like Kempe. Alex Turcotte's really taking advantage of it. Like, those guys with speed to take advantage of that. But even Hiller said after the last game, someone asked him about the switch from the 1-3-1 to the 1-2-2, and he said it is still, they are like you said, they want to keep their identity defensively, and there's still a lot of standing around when they drop into that 1-2-2. It's not like they're still certainly not a running gun team. So I don't think there's been a huge change from this team offensively. I think that they're still a defense first team. They're still going to potentially struggle to consistently outscore any of their problems that come up. Like, I don't think they're that kind of team. I mean, I don't see a ton of difference from this team offensively, really. I think that a big thing is just Alex Ferrier came in so hot to start the season. Andre Kopitar and Adrian Kempe are having incredible seasons, which goes a long way for you, right? Like if your best players in Kopitar and Kempe are having that good of a season, you have a young player coming in producing like Alex Ferrier, your offense is probably doing pretty good. But I don't think there's been like big systemic changes that I can point to that say, yeah, Jim Hiller's fixing the offensive, quote unquote issues for this team.
All right, up next, we're going to get into some more of the individual players and how they performed so far this season. We'll do that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, those of us that live here in Southern California, obviously very lucky that we live in a place where we can attend so many live events, obviously sports, but it's not just about sports. You got theater events, concert shows, comedies as well. And you can check out live events no matter where you are by doing what I do, and that is using Gametime for your ticket needs. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks. Makes getting tickets for live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the flubs so you can only get incredible deals or only see incredible deals. They have all-in pricing, shows you the total up front, no surprises at checkout, and you can check out the vantage point of your panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy it, so you know exactly the view you're going to get. Also, lowest price guaranteed, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. All right, we continue with Austin Stanovich, who covers the LA Kings for the Sporting Tribune. And last time you were on the show, it was right before the season started. We had kind of a roundtable show with Carl Balikian and yourself, and we talked about what are we going to do with Drew Doughty out. And I had suggested Brant Clark on the top pairing. You guys both were saying Jordan Spence. Well, it turns out we were all wrong, and Vladislav Gavrikov teamed up with Mikey Anderson, doing a great job. Certainly we didn't see that coming. Gabby also a UFA after this season. He's got the no movement clause, so not going to get traded anywhere. How do you think it plays out with the Vladislav Gavrikov, and maybe your thoughts on that move to put him up there on the top pairing?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, me and Carl were both really big on Jordan Spence taking that spot, and that really, I mean, Spence struggled with that one. So that was a big swing and a miss for me and him. But it's funny. We're almost at a point where Gavrikov's playing so well. You mentioned he's a pending UFA. He might be pricing himself out of LA at this point. I mean, this is a guy that is really playing some excellent hockey in a top pair role, taking on really tough competition alongside Mikey Anderson. And I was talking to Jesse Cohen a few weeks ago on his podcast about it. And the kind of craziest part to me is that we've seen Gavrikov try and take that role before. In Columbus and here in LA when Anderson went down his first year, he got put next to Drew Doughty. And both times, I mean, it was a disaster for him. I mean, his numbers were brutal every time he's moved up into a top pair role. So when they first did it, I had a lot of concern. You see a guy who's struggling in that role, plays offside, it could go pretty bad, and he has stepped up in a big way. I think he and Mikey Anderson have got to be one of the best shutdown pairs in hockey right now. He uses his reach so well. He's so long. He's just taken another step too, I think, with his puck moving. And maybe there's, after Saturday's game, Mike Anderson mentioned that, a guy like him and maybe even a guy like Gavrikov have gotten more and different touches with the switch away from the 1-3-1. So I think there's maybe been something that's just benefited him getting kind of looks in different areas. But it's been a surprise to me, frankly, how well he's taken to that role. And I think at this point, you'd have to assume they're going to do whatever it takes to get him back. I think it's actually going to be fascinating to see what happens when Drew Doughty does come back. Because can you break up a pair playing that well? I would think they do, but then who do you pair with Gavrikov on the second pair? What does that do to his game? Is he going to find any drop off now that he's not getting those same touches? Like, I think that he's created, what you typically think of as a really good problem. You have two guys that can play that number one defenseman role, but it is something that the Kings are going to have to figure out soon because he is just playing so well for them.
Yeah, that was actually my next question for you. You're a guy that gets out to practice a lot more than I do. What are you hearing about Drew Doughty? I know he's skating, but I don't believe he's skating with the team. Thoughts on when he might be coming back? And obviously that'll be decision time for Jim Miller, but no setbacks or anything. I guess there's no rush, right? with the way that Gavrikov and Anderson are playing, so he can have all the time in the world. But what are you hearing about him in his return?
Yeah, nothing really new. I think that they certainly are going to take their time, but also we know that Drew Doughty is going to make sure he comes back as soon as humanly possible. Like as soon as the doctors tell him he is ready to go, he's going to be on the ice and playing, 25 minutes a night because that's just the way he's wired. I would assume sometime into this month, early February. I think the real indicator is when he starts practicing with the team again. I think he's still at least a couple weeks out, considering he hasn't started playing with the team. So if I had to kind of give a educated guess here, I'd say probably late January, early February. Maybe they push him back till I haven't looked at what day the Four Nations is, but I think it's right around the All-Star break usually is. So maybe they even just wait till after that to get him back in. I'm not too sure.
Obviously, one of the things that has not worked for the Kings all season long has been the power play. I can't imagine Drew Doughty coming back is going to do anything to make that worse. I don't know how much better he's going to make it, but what do you think can a Drew Doughty returning, can that be, will it make the power play noticeably better?
I mean, you'd like to hope so. I don't know if, I don't think that the gap in Drew Doughty as an overall player and between him and Brant Clark is quite significant at this point. I don't know if the gap as a power play quarterback is big enough for me to be really confident that's going to be transformed for this power play. I do think the fact that he's a much bigger shot threat than Clark could maybe give him another element. But I think that, I don't think certainly Clark is a problem there. I don't think that upgrading on him is what's going to change this. I think that it's more systemic and I don't think this team has the profile fits to make a functioning power play work really well. I think that going back to losing Gabe Velarde and then now losing Vic Arvidsson as well, the lack of a right-handed forward up on that top unit just to give them different looks makes it really hard. I mean, going 4 lefties and then 1 righty being your defenseman is just a really hard way to have a functioning power play, especially when you don't have, they've got some really talented players. You don't have a Nikita Kucherov or a Connor McDavid or a David Pastrnak. You don't have that one guy that can just kind of take a hold of a power play and will them through things because they're just so incredibly talented. So I hope, and again, maybe having a more significant shot threat from the point is a big difference maker for this power play. I would not bank on that, though. I think they're going to have to find, again, a more systemic and a more kind of big picture solution to that power play.
Quinton Byfield is always a topic of interest. Obviously did not start the season the way a lot of us thought he would, but last 9 games, 6 goals, 9 points. It's enough to get us hopeful that things are going in the right direction. Your thoughts on Quinton Byfield's interesting season so far?
Yeah, interesting is a good way to put it. I mean, it was kind of a funny season. He talked about it. He came in with a lot of confidence, had a really good training camp and preseason, and then it really, those first 25 to 30 games or so were rough for him. I thought the first 10 to 12 he actually looked fine. He was maybe a little snake bitten, but you could see the confidence just die. I mean, there were so many plays in that 12 to 30 game range where he had a clean look at the net and he tried to pass it off or he tried to over stick handle, and you could just tell that was a guy that was playing with zero confidence. And to me, I look back at that game in New York against the Rangers where he throws the behind the back move and then sets up Warren Fogle for a goal. And I think there is a noticeable switch flip there in how he played from then on. He just looked like a completely different player. He actually highlighted the goal later in the game against Shesterkin, beating a elite goalie like that clean. He said really gave him a lot more confidence in his shot. He kind of got it back, feeling better about being able to beat goalies. But I just think it's really a confidence thing. And, I think he was a little unlucky to start. I think he was shooting at 4%, which was not sustainable. And he's found so much chemistry with Warren Fogle, too, which I think is a big thing. I think that I've always been a big believer in Quinton Byfield's game, and I think it was a matter of time before he turned around, and we've seen it now. The question is, he's got, I think he said 6 goals in his last 9 games or something like that. It needs to level up to a more consistent level. It can't be 25 games having 3 goals and then 6 goals in 9 games and whatever that math works out to, you could have a 20-goal season, but it's like, yeah, but 18 of those goals came in a 15-game stretch or a 25-game stretch. That's not good enough, right? Now it's about finding a consistent level where he can be a dominant player, because that Edmonton game, he showed just how dominant he can be and how important he can be for this team in flipping matchups. We need to see that on a consistent basis, and then you've got a real player on your hands.
Well, you talked about something that you swung and missed on. You hit a potential home run with something else that you were predicting. We're going to let you pat yourself on the back a little bit. We'll do that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. It's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. I'm a Steelers fan. Pittsburgh's getting 9.5 points in Baltimore against the Ravens. I might have to get in on that action. Steelers might lose, but I don't think they're going to lose by that much. They always play the Ravens tough. My wife's a Chargers fan. They're in Houston to take the Texans on Saturday. 2.5-point road favorites. And looking for some playoff action this Saturday. Should be fun. We'll be glued to the TV in my house. Just visit FanDuel.com to get in on the action today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make the playoffs even more unforgettable with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, we're wrapping it up with Austin Stanovich of the Sporting Tribune. And Austin, you called this from early in the season. You were saying Alex Turcotte should be playing on the top line with Andre Kopitar and Adrian Kempe. Probably took a little longer than you would have liked to have seen it, but he's been up there for the last few games and has certainly looked good. Had a great play against Tampa Bay to get that primary assist on the Kempe game-winning goal. So kudos to you on that one. How do you see the top six going forward now that Trevor Moore is coming back or is back?
Yeah, that's going to be a really fascinating thing, and to see how Jim Hiller kind of handles that. I think that maybe Saturday's game gave us an insight to that. I would certainly in the short term assume that he keeps Turcotte up there, especially after that play against Tampa. And it looks like it'll be Tanner Jeannot going to the fourth line, and then Trevor Moore for now going up with Quinton Byfield and Warren Fogle. And then obviously, you have the ability to put Moore back with Fiala and Deneau. You have the opportunity to kind of switch things around in there. But I think that the top nine in general is everyone not named Tanner Jeannot and Trevor Lewis to make it a little easier. Like, I think that group of players is going to be the top nine. How that configures into, top six, first, second, third line, I'm not sure. I do really like Alex Turcotte on that top line. I think he's a great fit. I would like to see that line stay together, and then in that kind of middle six, if you want to call it that, is where you can do maybe some experimenting, maybe try Laferriere somewhere else. Like, if you want to get more Deneau and Fiala back together, I think he could be a good fit with Byfield and Fogle. But I think for now, the lines that finish the Tampa Bay game is what we're going to see going forward with that.
I know your most recent article for the Sporting Tribune, I believe, which people can check out at thesportingtribune.com, was about a Kevin Fiala problem. Now, we want people to go read the article, but what was kind of the gist of what you were writing about with Kevin?
Yeah, it's been, and Jim Hiller said this, he said that he thinks, and even probably if you ask Kevin, he thinks it hasn't been a great start for Fiala, right? To his credit, he's on pace for right around 30 goals. But he's got, I think, 2 5-on-5 assists. He's on pace for, fewest point totals in 6 seasons, fewest assists in a season in his entire career, like a -22 plus minus. Like, it's been a real struggle for him. And I think, and it's something that I talked a lot with Todd McClellan about, a couple different players, including Fiala, but he's a player who has a lot of flaws that you kind of overlook at times because he has a potential to put up 75, 80 points in the season. So you can kind of deal with that. But when he's not putting up those offensive numbers, it becomes a lot harder to deal with the offensive zone penalties, which he has cleaned up a bit lately, but those kind of always creep back into his game. The turnovers in bad spots, the kind of blown defensive coverage at time. Like, if he's not producing offensively, it becomes so difficult to kind of overlook those problems. And I think by no fault of his own, just because he's a player that is so skilled, that likes to have the puck on his stick to try and create. It does create some problems for Jim Hiller and trying to put lines together, because there's only one puck out there. He can't have a ton of the puck if he's playing with Andre Kopitar, because Andre Kopitar is going to have the puck. Quinton Byfield, the way he's playing and his talent, you want Quinton Byfield to have the puck a ton. So you're kind of stuck keeping that Danault Fiala duo together, which isn't, it's not a, I don't want to say it's a bad thing, but it's really limiting. Like if Fiala just creates these, problems. Just again, I don't want to, bag on the guy or say it's his fault. It's just a reality of who he is. But it does create a problem for Jim Miller. It creates a lineup problem for him. It creates a ice time problem for him. One of the things he's done recently to try and get some more offense out of him and to get him more minutes, and he plays the full 2 minutes on the power play, which is good. But to me, that's also telling that this guy maybe he doesn't really trust him that much at 5-on-5. Like there's definitely, I think, some lost trust there. And again, I just think that a combination of things that kind of come with now not a ton of offense, especially at even strength, just creates a real problem for Jim Miller. And I think probably a real headache for him. Like Kevin Fiala is a headache to begin with, just because of those frustrating things I mentioned before. And when he's not adding 75 points to it, it becomes really tough for a coach.
Well, the Kings have won 12 of 16. They got points in 14 of 16. Pretty good. They cannot gain any ground on Vegas, and they can't get any separation on Edmonton, because Vegas has won 12 of 14 and Edmonton has won 14 of 18. It's insane what is going on right now with those top 3 teams in the Pacific. It's wild.
Yeah, it's crazy. And Zach Dooley tweeted about this a while ago, and I have not since looked at it. I also wonder, and to Anaheim's credit, they've actually been playing really good hockey recently, but I do think it's maybe a slightly top-heavy division. So I also have to wonder like how much of those top 3 teams being good is having maybe a weaker division below them. But even out, I mean, the Kings have been beaten up on a lot of teams outside their division too, so they certainly haven't been, feasting on that bottom. It's going to be a dogfight for this Kings team to try, and especially if they don't win the division and then they're stuck with one of, I mean, it's probably going to be Edmonton again. Let's face it. It's just it's a really, really tough division. It's going to be a really, really tough division to get out of because of those 2 teams. Like it is crazy. It is wild how good the top 3 teams have been. Like the winning percentage numbers are just stupid.
So real quick, earlier in the season, we were like, okay, not a bad start, but they need to be more consistent. Okay, now they're getting more consistent. And we're like, okay, they're getting more consistent, but we need to see them beat some of the better teams. Now they're starting to beat some of the better teams. Is the next kind of thing maybe having to take that on the road? Because it's been awesome at home, obviously. Is that kind of the next thing? Is it getting more consistent and taking on those bigger and better teams on the road?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's definitely the next step for them. And again, I think the kind of sucky thing for fans is that the real next step is doing it in April, May, and you just kind of have to wait on that. Like, and again, be excited about this Kings team. I'm not telling anyone not to be excited. They absolutely, they look so good. They look like such a strong team. They've beaten up on all the good teams. But the real next step is doing it in the games that really matter. And I think another thing to keep an eye on, I was talking to Dennis Bernstein before the Tampa game. I think the Kings in 12 or 13 one-goal games had picked up a point in all but one of them. And it's like that is an insane stat. On the negative side, that's playing with fire a bit. It maybe isn't sustainable. But on the positive side of things, this team's ability to grind out wins, to me, is the biggest difference and the biggest reason to be confident in this team going into the playoffs. Like in tight games, they aren't just good, they are immaculate in those tight games. They've been getting good goaltending, and obviously the way they defend, like you mentioned earlier, is a big reason for it. But just like there's an element of finding a way to win at all costs that I think we have not seen from a Kings team in a while. Should be very exciting for fans, and is the one thing that makes me think this could be a different outcome in the playoffs.
He is Austin Stanovich. You can check out his work at thesportingtribune.com. He is a must follow on X and Twitter, and always very interactive with his followers as well. You can follow him at @Stanovich68. Austin, always a pleasure. Always love hearing your thoughts Always appreciate you giving your time, and really appreciate this. Thank you.
Yeah, of course I do. I always have a blast coming on here. Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll see you out at crypto.com here in the near future.
Sounds good. We'll see you there.
All right. Take care. That was Austin Stanovich. Hope you guys enjoyed that. For you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up on Wednesday, we'll have a preview of the Kings Flames game coming up as the Kings wrap up their 5-game homestand. Thursday, we'll obviously recap that game, see if the Kings can make it 10 in a row at home. Friday, of course, it'll be a little bit of a hybrid show. It's usually our fan feedback show. We'll definitely get some of that in, but also a recap of that. We talked about the Kings getting it done on the road, taking on the Jets in Winnipeg on Friday. So that will be a fun game to look back on, hopefully, as well. Email address to get in on the feedback show, lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. And you can always leave your comments if you're watching on YouTube in the comment section. Stay interactive with the show on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram. We're at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings, go.